if this doesn't kill me, it's going to change my life forever because there's probably a bullet in my brain.
We just slow this story down a little bit.
What do you think affected me the most? Was it this bullet in my head that I thought was going to kill me, or was it growing up with a father who had some anger issues?
That just tells you how significant that early imprint is.
I was a regular doc for years. He sat me down. He said, Neil, you don't need to get to know their story. You just need to treat them and street them. I'm not a treat them and street them kind of guy. Mid-career, I decided to go back and do a psychiatry residency.
That is your gift of making medicine relational.
All I have to offer you is my brokenness.
I feel like it's one of the more meaningful things we get an opportunity to do with people.
Can we talk about how your wounding changed your self-narrative?
What did you learn about sadness?
Dude, I'm getting emotional right now just thinking about that.
We've been taught everything except how to be human. I'm Miles Adcox, and this podcast turns raw experience into practical wisdom. So if you're ready to stop performing your life and start participating in it, you're in the right place. This is Human School. If you close your eyes and picture a psychiatrist, you probably wouldn't imagine someone barefoot on a paddleboard guiding a conversation through the ripples of a creek. But my guest today isn't just your typical psychiatrist. Dr. Neil Bomar combines the wisdom of neuroscience with the wisdom of nature. He understands something powerful, that healing rarely happens in sterile places, and transformation doesn't fit neatly within four office walls. Neil serves as the Vice President and Medical Director at Milestones, our residential trauma program, and his presence alone reshapes what psychiatry can look like. He guides guests to reconnect with their own rhythms, whether that's on a hiking trail, next to a creek bed, or around a campfire. Neil's work beautifully bridges cutting-edge psychiatric practices with deeply human experiential approaches to trauma, recovery, and resilience. He's equal parts doctor, teacher, outdoorsman, and guide. But above all, he's someone who sees the whole human being beyond any diagnosis. His laid-back approach, profound knowledge, and genuine compassion have changed countless lives, mine included. So whether you're skeptical of therapy, curious about trauma healing, or simply love a good paddleboard story, I can promise today's conversation with Dr. Neil Bomar will meet you exactly where you are.
I don't deserve it. I'll take it.
Welcome aboard, buddy.
Thanks. Cheers.
I hate that we had to do a podcast to have a good conversation.
I'll take it.
How fast we've been moving lately.
I'll take it any way I can get you.
But I'm excited to sit with you. I always love our conversations. I think the first time we ever talked, one of our mutual dear friends and colleague, Monty Furlong, who since retired, connected us.
Yeah.
And I think, what do you have, 15 minutes outlined?
Yeah, she scheduled us to just meet and greet for 15 minutes. And at an hour and a half, you'd offered me the job. So
on that call.
On that call.
I knew we went for a really long time.
Yeah.
I didn't remember it all happened on that first call.
It sure did, man.
Yeah, somewhere between fishing and paddleboards, I knew we had hit the mark.
That's right.
Now, we have a lot of overlapping passions, which is something that I want to highlight as I let more people under the hood of who I am and who my friends are and what it is that we represent as it relates to just optimizing the human experience and becoming more mentally and emotionally well. So I think I, for a long time, tried to fit in the box of how people, the DNA of people that you see facilitate those services. And then it wasn't probably until 10 years into the field that I started realizing the best and most optimal outcomes are delivered from people who are fully themselves, regardless of what they know.
Yeah.
And so I would lead with that. There's a lot I want to ask you. I want our audience to get to know you a little bit. So we're going to dip into your story some, if you're okay with that. But I'm curious if you've had that challenge of integrating Neil Bomar, the doctor, the psychiatrist, the expert, with Neil Bomar, the human.
Yeah. So one of our equine therapists, who's one of my very good friends, and you know her and love her as well, one day she just looked at me. I was doing something really goofy, and she said, "Bomar, you're a lot." And I was like, "Okay, well, thanks," but I didn't quite know how to take that. And I think it was Socrates who said, "The unexamined life is a wasted life." And interestingly, before coming to Onsite, I was so ensconced in Western medicine, medicine management. So I was a regular doc for years. I worked in primary care, became a corporate doc for Toyota for a couple of years. That just was very dry for me. And so mid-career, I decided to go back and do a psychiatry residency. And that first week, I was like, I'm home. These are my people. Like this was in 2001. So this is 24 years ago. And it took that mid-career change for me to get into the field that used my skill set, right? And it's interesting to be a doctor in a field that does not use your skill set. So I'll never forget the medical director at the time at Toyota. We had 7 full-time doctors there. They had 13,000 employees. And so people are just working hard, getting injured. And so the doctors are trying to treat them and send them to physical therapy and surgery and that kind of thing. And he had a meeting with me scheduled, and I was like, "Ooh, this is definitely unusual," because he doesn't meet with the doctors that much. And he sat me down. He said, "Neil," he said, "you're spending too much time with the patients here." It's like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, you don't need to get to know their story. You just need to treat them and street them." And so that's an old adage in medicine: treat them and street them, right? And especially in the emergency room, because you have people coming in, you got to get them out to make room for other people. And so I'm not a treat them and street them kind of guy.
Is that how you optimize your revenue in traditional medicine, is volume?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And
volume in what you prescribe, I guess.
That's fair to say. But after that meeting with him, when he said, you're not here to get to know the patient, you're here to treat him and street him, I went home that day and I told my wife, I said, I think I'm meant to do something else. And it was right around 9/11, interrupted my career. We left Georgetown, Kentucky, and I love my time at Toyota. I learned a ton there and worked with some great docs. But I'm in my mid-30s. I've got 2 kids, or actually I had 1 kid at the time, and go back to residency and get into psychiatry. And it's like, oh wow, I'm really home. Interestingly, especially back in that day, it was very pharmaceutically driven. Psychiatry was, mental health was pharmaceutically driven. And there was a definite disconnect between the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist is the med prescriber, and the therapist is the therapist. And when I started my psychiatric practice, it was predicated on me prescribing meds and sending them back to their therapist. And as I start my practice, I'm like, gosh, I'm really enjoying getting to know this person's story. And so
almost got you fired at the last gig.
Yeah, it really did. So anyway, I didn't do a lot of self-examination. I'm so busy with kind of a young career in psychiatry, got a young kid. We had some fertility issues with the second one. So that was it's a whole nother thing. And so then after that fateful call with you, I get to Onsite 8.5 years ago, almost 9 years ago. Actually, gosh, I think it was 9 years ago this month in July.
I think that I want to back into your story a little bit, but I think it's interesting that it was a career change in your story that ushered you more into who you are as a person and how that impacted you as a professional. Because a lot of the early training I had in the mental health space was you never let them see the guy behind the curtain.
Right.
And who you are is not relevant to the conversation.
Good.
I always felt that was really unnatural.
It is very unnatural.
And I've always wanted to follow natural rhythms of healing, so that the way we show up for people doesn't feel manufactured,
yes.
And that we lead with tools before we introduce connection. And I used to try to connect through what I knew. It's like, let me impress somebody by what I've read, what I've studied, the hours that I've put in to be a professional in this field. But it always felt just a little bit inauthentic to who I am. And I'm not saying we need to come in and share over. I think there's an overshare element too.
Yeah.
But I've tried to create a place, and I think you have too, with the culture you're creating at Milestones, where you can walk that line of being who you are, and that only elevates what it is that we know and what we do. And for me, it took the same thing. I had to have a
Mhm.
big career change in order for me to utilize my natural skill set. But it's odd that we both chose professions that kind of tell you to keep that tucked in.
It's very interesting. And when I got to Onsite, I was very buttoned up, and I was very kind of Western medicine, science, medication. And then, the first few weeks with the therapist, I'm hearing about holotropic breath work and EMDR and brain spotting and all these
Woo-woo
things.
stuff.
Yeah, just like somatic therapies and stuff. And I'm like, where have I landed? What is going on here? Is this place too woo-woo for me? But judge it by its fruits, right?
Mm.
And so I saw people getting healed by these therapies. And interestingly, I started dipping my toe into those therapies and started looking at my story.
Mm.
And it was so enlightening. I mean, I've told you this before, but like Onsite is a massive part of my healing, a massive part of my personal healing. And getting back to the statement that I'm a lot, I mean, if you're an Enneagram guy, I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, I'm an enthusiast. If there's a party, I like to make it more, and I've always considered that like something that I love about myself, but I didn't have the self-awareness that for a lot of other people, it's a little bit too much. To that point, my family, my wife and my 2 kids and this was just 3 years ago, we did a family intensive at Onsite, my wife and 2 kids. And I was so excited for them to go in there. And
when was it?
This was about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember the timeline. And I remember we talked a little bit about it.
Yeah.
We never really got to unpack it though. So.
And so, I was like, I'm so excited for the kids to focus on mom and mom's issues and this and that. And we get in there and it's like, whoop, Dad, we have some things to tell you. It's like, what? I'm a psychiatrist. I'm just very well adapted human. What do you have to tell me? What are my issues? And I found out from my children and my wife that my enthusiasm can be a little much sometimes. And so I'll never forget.
When you say a little much, you mean like, does it lean towards like toxic positivity or?
Probably that's a very good term. I think that's a part of it. One of my quotes years ago, and it's no longer my life quote, was the good is the enemy of the best. Okay. So if there's something good, how can I make it the best? Better. And man, that steals joy. That steals creativity. Like sometimes I think good is acceptable. Like good can be the best. And
is it in part, I think I can really relate to that. Is it in part that if good is always looking for better, which in some ways can be a really good thing.
Yes.
I like that entrepreneurs are wired that way. It's people who are driving to always succeed, athletes.
Right.
There's some good in that lane.
Yeah.
But if you can never be content with what you have, you're always going to be looking for something different, which that's what you're saying steals joy.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And so back to the Enneagram work, when I first got that book, I was like, oh, cool, I'm a 7, I'm an enthusiast, But when you get down to what is the 7 attempting to avoid, it's avoiding pain. And I don't do pain well. I don't do sadness well. I like to be positive and, I'm pretty good at denial, honestly. And that's not a good thing to be good at.
What did you learn about sadness on the way up?
Oh, wow. And that gets into my story. This is a little complicated. My father died a year and a half ago. And my father was a very exceptional human. By exceptional, I don't necessarily mean exceptionally good. He was exceptionally passionate, dogmatic. He just lived life in the nth gear all the time. And so there was not a lot of time for introspection or self-awareness or that kind of thing. And so keeping up with Dad and how is Dad doing and how much is Dad drinking and how is Dad treating my mother, how's Dad treating me and my sister, it was a lot. And one of the things I loved about my father, he was so transparent. He could not help but be himself. And so the goodness in my father, there was a lot of goodness. I mean, his work ethic, his love for nature, he taught me how to just really, really just get the most out of nature.
I got to share a dove field with him one year.
You did.
I could see that.
Man, I appreciate you doing that too. That meant a lot. Yeah. We, and the fall is such a magical time, and fall on the farm is such a magical time.
He was in his element in there, because we were hosting. It was like a opening day of dove season or something?
Yeah, it was an impromptu party.
It was a dove hunt, which is very traditional in the South. And
very much
you do like barbecues around them. And he was when you could tell, because was he a politician early?
Very much so.
Yeah, what was it? He was in the House.
Yeah,
right?
He was the
state representative.
Yeah, he was a whip in the House of Representatives. Yeah.
So you could see that natural ability to work the room. I mean, the tables in the garage where we were, to every hay bale where people were stationed in the dove field. I mean, he really made his way around and just made people feel welcome.
He did. He was known as Happy Jack. And many times he was happy, but there were times he was not happy. And so my family, my mother and my sister and I got to experience those times. And so I want to be respectful to his legacy and his memory. But if we're going to be honest and talk about reality, there were some times with my father that were very difficult. And so fast forward to the Living Center program with my children, and Carlos, our guide, who's incredible. My family wanted to adopt Carlos after that.
Carlos gets that a lot.
But you on speed dial.
Between people wanting to take him home or people wanting to use his laugh as a ringtone.
Oh my God, his laugh is unbelievable. First time I heard it, shocked me.
Sorry. Yeah. And you realize that's real. Oh my gosh, that's real. And he's actually proud of it. That's authentic. It's so great.
Can I do his laugh real quick?
Can you do it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, give us a Carlos.
Is that it?
That's pretty
I
close.
think I broke the micro.
That's pretty close.
I love it though.
Yep.
So we're doing this exercise where we're writing down things that, from a family standpoint, things we want to keep, things we want to get rid of.
Okay.
And my 26-year-old, who was 23 or 24 at the time, wrote on a card, dogmatism. And Carla's like, Cole, tell us what does that mean? And so that was lovingly directed at me. And he had to say the hard thing, Dad, you are so dogmatic. You are so passionate about things. And sometimes it's just a lot, and sometimes it doesn't leave space for us to experience our feelings and our emotions and our opinions.
How old is he?
He was 23 at the time. He's 26 now.
Wow.
Yeah.
To be able to say that as a 23-year-old. You've done something right.
Well, he did something.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, but to get that permission, usually 23-year-olds aren't talking like that or identifying that.
Absolutely.
But when he says dogmatic, usually think of it usually gets tied with religion, but I think in other ways it can be what you're deeply ingrained in belief in. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Very much so.
Was he saying that about kind of your profession?
No, not at all. It's just my approach to life.
Okay, got it.
If you did this, can you do it better? And I don't think in a shaming way, I pray to God that I didn't do that to my kids, that I shamed them. But it's I feel like when you are blessed with health and relative abundance, you have a duty to show up with your best every day. And yeah, that makes sense, right? But throwing that on a kid, that's a lot. And what that comes right out of my developmental wounding.
I want to pause for a moment here and tell you a little bit about what I believe is one of the best kept secrets in the mental health space. And it's a program called Milestones. It's an immersive experience. It's multi-week, and it's a residential program where people can come and be guided by an expert group of people who have some of the best credentials in the space, but are also some of the best humans in the space. And they happen to specialize in psychological trauma or compound stress and all the variety of things that can come out of people who've experienced that. But I don't know anybody that you put them in the middle of that community and that space and that hospitality and that clinical product for 30 days, it'd be hard not to transform. I have been around the residential healing spaces for a couple of decades. And 10 years ago, we set out to build what we felt could be one of the best in the world. And we did it. We kept it small on purpose. It's still small. That's why you don't hear about it much. And it's why we don't advertise much. We're primarily word of mouth when it comes to those that join our community. But I want to tell you about it here because I've never worked with a better staff. I've never worked with a better program and product, and I've never seen better results than what I see at our residential program at Milestones. And so I hope you'll check it out and learn more about Experience Milestones, and it might be something you or somebody you might cross paths with at some point might be able to benefit from. And I just wanted to make sure I shared it with you today. Say more about developmental wounding, just for people's ears up.
Well, and that's why I'm at Onsite, and that's why I love what I do, right?
How would you describe what that is? I think it can be a useful tool, because part of what we want this experience to be, these conversations, is that we're taking complicated concepts around psychology and change and humanizing them.
Yeah.
Because that's what part of the challenge I've had being in this field for so long is it feels like we're withholding information that could be really useful in people's living rooms and classrooms and boardrooms. And how do we take some of these concepts that really all it is how do you be a better human, do better relationships, optimize your life, have better conversations, resolve your issues, pay attention to and how do we make that more applicable? So concepts like, especially with you being here, because you know a lot about neuroscience and the brain and therapy, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I want to be careful stepping into that, because there's the idea of blaming, and I don't want to get into that because I don't think that's fair. And then there's the idea of developing a victimhood mentality, and that, as we know, I want to talk
about both of those.
And so that's not healthy either.
Developmental wounding.
Yeah. So when I did my residency in psychiatry, part of that residency was training in child and adolescent psychiatry. In the child and adolescent psychiatry book, I'll never forget it, opened it up. I think it was like the first or second sentence. It said, childhood mental health is predicated largely on the goodness of fit between the temperament of the child and the parents. Or parent. And so goodness of fit is a really interesting term, because, and interestingly, I just saw a client at Milestones, and part of her story, we had this discussion this morning, part of her story was that she felt very different from her family, and her family kind of had a particular mindset, a particular ethic in one way, and she was very different than the rest of the family. And that is a big part of her wounding.
A part of feeling like an outlier.
Absolutely. Yeah. Othered, outside. Yeah. And
just for the listener, that I think a lot of people can relate to that. I can relate to that. There is psychologically, we have biological wiring that is tribal in instinct.
Yes.
We need to be apart to survive, especially with, the people that we develop any kind of attachment to, whether it's secure or not. We need to be apart to survive. So often people can have really great families on paper, but just feel othered.
Yes.
They're a little bit outside. And over time, it's like a whole bunch of paper cuts. It's where you wake up one day and you feel completely lost. You can feel anxious. You can feel overwhelmed. You can feel like you can't navigate stress. You can feel depressed. And you're like, why?
Yes.
Everything's great. They're not divorced. There's no alcoholism in the home. But that outlier other part starts to interrupt our natural biology, because suddenly we don't feel part of the tribe. So we start looking outside of our tribe to find other places where we might fit in, and we start to adapt who we are to try to go. And I'm telling my story right now. I'll stop and get back.
No. And I want to hear your story. No, and that's all absolutely true. But my father, what is the saying we say over and over? Hurt people hurt people. And I'm not going to get into his story, but he was a very hurt child. And
you went back actually and found out information.
Oh, it was very easy to find out. Trust me, he talked about it a lot. And that's one of the big regrets and sadnesses I have for my father is he did not feel safe to do his own work. I don't think he felt safe with himself to do his own work because there was so much pain there. And so growing up, I'm just like, no one is really one-dimensional, but as I look at myself, like I love some very masculine things. I love to fish and hunt, especially fish now as I've gotten older. I'm not as angry at the animals anymore, right? And so I love to fish. I love to be outside. I love to do kind of masculine things. There's a very large feminine part of me, if you want to use that term. And feminine by me, meaning I feel like I'm an empath. I like the arts. I will go out with my wife and pick out some of her clothes. I mean, kind of stuff that in Southern toxic masculinity culture, you just wouldn't want to tell your friends, right? And I don't necessarily have shame about it. It's just that's how I'm wired. And for Dad wanted me to be that Southern Christian athlete, hunt, fish, kind of masculine in the way that he saw that. And now that he's gone, I have the sweetest relationship with my mother now, and it's so cool. And I really feel like I kind of look like my mother. I'm very much wired like her. And I'm kind of embracing that softer part of myself. And that softer part of myself also is not the overly dogmatic, overly enthusiastic. Like, I just feel like I've been able to kind of relax. And it's not Dad's fault. As Terrence, our amazing therapist at Onsite, says, up until you're 18, you can blame your parents. After 18, it's yours to own and it's yours to work on. And you need to quit blaming your parents. And that's one of the things we really try to do at Milestones. I mean, obviously people come in and they talk about their developmental wounding, and we want to be respectful of the parents, because we don't know, we weren't there, right? And so it's not fair for us to blame the parents, if you will. But many times there is that lack of goodness of fit between the temperament of parent and child. And so there was definitely an aspect of me that resonated with my dad, but there's a big part of me that did not. And so,
would you describe developmental wounding to just somebody that's never had any information or education about it? I guess it'd be similar if you compared it physically, because we usually are a lot more attuned to physical healing and ailments than we are emotional healing and ailments.
Yeah.
But if your development gets interrupted or stunted at some point, the natural rhythm, natural way we develop psychologically and biologically, physiologically, if it gets interrupted, it's kind of like a bone breaking physically.
That's right.
And it takes time to heal. And then sometimes if you don't have the proper care, it won't heal correctly.
Very true.
And then in your 20s or 30s or 40s or sometimes even 50s, and sometimes every now and then we'll have somebody come through in their 70s or 80s.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
I've never really looked at my timeline.
It happens all the time.
To see what my developmental years looked like, where I had interruptions, and how that's imprinted me to be on autopilot through my entire life.
Mm-hmm. So
I feel like it's one of the more meaningful things we get an opportunity to do with people.
Absolutely. Bobby Chapman, our incredible adventure therapist, he has a term, I don't think he coined it, but he calls it Death Day. And Death Day is when you undergo developmental wounding. It's that day, typically in your childhood, where something happens and you realize, okay, this is the way this is going to go. And, I want to be careful telling the story, but my death day, I was 5. We lived on a farm in Shelbyville, Tennessee. It was a very steep driveway. It was a gravel driveway. I was learning to ride the bicycle. And my father was a very dogmatic man, right? Very passionate man. He wanted things to go well. He wanted me to learn to ride the bicycle. And I just was not doing very good that day. And so rather than falling in the gravel and getting gravel in my hands, we were in the grass, and it was really bumpy and it was rocky. There are limestone outcrops in Middle Tennessee. And so I just kept falling over. And I'm just going to say he responded in a way that made me realize, oh, okay, this is how this is going to go, being his child. And so in essence, kind of that was my death day. Like I knew this is going to be a different ride with this man. And it was. And so out of that, for me, came, I'm in it alone. Failure's not an option. I can't ask for help.
Don't show weakness.
Don't show weakness. Absolutely. So from that comes hyperautonomy. It sows the seeds of narcissism. Yeah. Because when you don't have true, authentic self-esteem, you have to kind of build your own narrative about yourself. And so, at Milestones, one of there's event trauma, And then there's developmental wounding. They can look they typically do look very, very, very
Interesting.
different. Yeah. So I've you know this story, but it's 21 years ago, 22 years ago. I was at my parents' farm. I stepped out the front door. It was Thanksgiving weekend, and a bullet fell from the sky, hit me in the nose, went through my nose into my cheek. At the time, we didn't know what it was. So Dad throws me in the car. We rush to the emergency room.
We slow this story down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine our listeners that live in urban areas are thinking, did you grow up in a saloon? I mean, how do you walk out the front door and a bullet goes through your face?
No, so
And I don't mean to laugh at that because that was
no.
a tragic story, but also it's like context. And when you live out in the country, there are people that are hunting in different seasons. Right. And it's very, very, very rare for something like that to happen. But it can happen when you're downrange or in.
That's right. So our house that I grew up in, there's not another house within 3/4 of a mile because I grew up on a big farm. And so when this thing hit me in the face, I literally thought some ice had fallen off a jet or a hawk had like dropped a rabbit from a mile high. So we're looking around on the ground like, what hit me? And my mother runs out and she's like, oh my God, you got a hole in your nose. And when you breathe, it's bubbling.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And as I get in the car, so we're on the way. And so I'm a doctor at the time, so I'm feeling around. I've got an entrance wound here, and there's no exit wound. And so my first thought is, I'm gonna die. Like I have.
You had no idea what went in your nose.
No clue.
Because you didn't hear a gunshot.
No. I heard something. Bam.
You could hear the whiz of the bullet.
Yeah. I get bam, hit me. Wheeled me around. I looked down. My hands are full of blood. I released the blood. I remember this. The thing I remember the most is the sound of a handful of blood hitting the pavement. And so on the way to the ER, I'm like, gosh, man, it's been a good ride, but this may be it. I'm feeling around for an exit wound, and I'm like, well, if this doesn't kill me, it's probably going to change my life forever because there's probably a bullet in my brain.
Oh, so at that point you'd connected the dots and thought, this has got to be a bullet.
Yeah, because my mother's like, there's a round hole right here.
Like a 22 caliber?
Yeah, almost yellow. So, so we get to the ER and the doctor says, like, we're going to take 6 x-rays, just sit tight. They check my vitals. My vitals are fine. After one x-ray, the x-ray tech is like, we're done. I'm like, no. I heard the doctor say 6 x-rays. She's like, no, we just need 1. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, well, you want to come back and look? So I'm looking at my x-ray.
Is that something doctors do with other doctors?
Yeah, exactly.
Invite you into the process a little more than the average person?
For sure. So I go back, I look, there's a bullet in my cheek, in my face. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh God, there it is. I could feel it.
Crazy.
Yeah, crazy. I tell you that story, and sometimes I tell that to the clients at Milestones when we talk about event trauma versus developmental wounding.
Okay.
So, and then I asked him, what do you think affected me the most? Was it this bullet in my head that I thought was going to kill me? Or was it growing up with a father who was extremely passionate, maybe drank a little too much and had some anger issues? And they're like, it was the developmental wounding, we're sure that affected you more. And that's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
And I make up they probably arrive at that conclusion, A, because they're trauma survivors.
Right. And
probably navigating some of the same issues, and B, because they're in residential care learning this stuff every day. But your average person hearing that, it's like you got shot in the face.
Exactly.
Versus you had a tough childhood.
So
it doesn't equate.
No,
and I'm so glad you're sharing this part of the story. It's so important.
So interestingly, if you think about the bullet story, there's no contextual background to it. It didn't happen in relationship. It doesn't represent anything. It wasn't as a result of abuse or neglect or anything like that. It was just like an act of God.
Accident.
Yeah, freak accident. Absolutely. And so,
to be clear to our listeners, it's all context. Trauma's all context.
Yes.
And so it might have manifested differently had you been under threat by someone holding a gun and experiencing that.
Yes.
But even that, we've seen those type of cases a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm still not so sure that it's the long-term developmental stuff. Because, well, for example, here's a good example. We, through our foundation work for several years, we were working with the veteran community. We still do work with the veteran community, just a little different. We had to pause one of the programs during COVID and haven't brought it back yet. But we had some really good data that actually got published a handful of times from doing a Veterans Living Centered program. It's kind of the marquee workshop that we're known for at Onsite, but we tweaked it and made it a little bit more trauma sensitive towards combat veterans. And I had a relationship with the chaplain up at Fort Campbell at the time and had to be really kind of on the DL with both active duty and veterans on who could come participate in a mental health program, because you had to make sure they didn't lose benefits or it's kind of insane that that's the case. But we sure enough had a waiting list. We take 40 or 50 of these men and women, and they would come spend 6-7 days with some of the top trauma practitioners in the world. And there was something magical that happened when you put all combat vets in the same room with psychological safety presence. It's almost like the healing started right then, before we ever introduced the tools. Because all the macho stuff that could go away for a minute and say, man, this really sucked. This was tough. And getting hit by that IED was tough, or all the things. But they'd all experienced the worst of the worst. But the first year really surprised us, because when we debriefed with the clinicians in supervision and said, where did you spend your time? We assumed it might have been, well, I was in, can't even think of the name of it. Anyway, not relative to the story, but I was outside Iraq. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. So I was trying to think of one of the places I could personally give a reference for. Gotcha. Not military time, but doing some other work. But let's say I'm outside Iraq and I was in a Humvee and I watched my buddy get blown up and I've never seen him again. So you'd think if you come to a trauma workshop to deal with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, that's where you'd focus. 95% of the folks, we focus on their developmental trauma.
Yeah.
As a means to resolve what they were navigating with what they experienced at war.
Yep.
That just tells you how significant that early imprint is and that developmental piece is. So I wanted to highlight that for people. So I think the general public just doesn't know that. And often you could go through life and have a pretty good upbringing and not ever have one of those events, not ever have something fall out of the sky and hit you in the nose, and still be off kilter and not know why.
That's right.
And or you get into care and you start looking at people and there's more obvious things to point out. There's another great study. I have to dig it back up, but it was where they took the adult children of alcoholics and put them in the same room with the adult children of workaholics. And they asked the question, who do you think's harder to treat?
Wow. Probably adult children of workaholics.
Yeah, and you and I probably can arrive at that conclusion and understand why, but it's like, why? The alcoholic had to grow up in a chaotic home. They had to be like physical violence or emotional violence or absentee. But one society has agreed somewhat that it is a negative thing once used in excess. The other society rewards and pats on the back. And so the adult children of the workaholics had the same developmental wounding.
Wow.
Dad wasn't there, mom wasn't there, never were there emotionally, they weren't emotionally regulated, they were always working. Same developmental wounding, but they didn't have anything to point at. They were like, my dad was a hero in my community.
Yeah.
He made all kinds of money. He did really well.
Yeah.
This is something I really think people could use for a context standpoint, just to help them contemplate what, their developmental story.
I love that, because that segues right into the idea of what is trauma. And you have people, it's so interesting to hear the Bessel van der Kolks and the, Gabor Mates of the world. And people are so invested in their definition of trauma. And they'll die on that hill. It's really interesting. They get really passionate about it. And when one expert says their definition, the other is like, well, that's ridiculous because it should be this. And I'm like, no, let's just relax, right? Can we all just agree that it's very complex, right? And I didn't make this up, but just the work I've done at Milestones over the last 9 years, I would say that trauma is something, and especially there's event trauma like the bullet in the face, right? But complex PTSD, which is more developmental usually in nature, if it negatively changes how you look at yourself, how you look at relationships, how you look at the world, and if you have a higher power, how you look at your higher power, that's developmental wounding. That's complex trauma.
Well, you said it when you gave that metaphor earlier of the death day.
Yeah.
where you were riding the bicycle and you knew at that moment, just a simple response from a caregiver landed in a way that you walked away as a young guy and said, well, that I've got to take this path alone, which means I need to start piecing together who I am. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, that's not necessarily always a bad thing, because we're always in our developmental years trying to become who we were created to be. We're trying to piece together parts of our story in our life to determine who are we in this world? How do we move about the world? Where it gets tricky is when you don't have secure attachment before your brain is fully developed, which we say is around 25. Mm-hmm. Then I think you start to fill in the gaps of the story you're making up before you're really equipped to do it. You kind of need a little help. You kind of need an older, wiser caregiver pouring into your story also to affirm some of the things that you might make up about what you feel is really bad about yourself. I can really relate to that. Mm. Then before you know it, there you are in your 20s, and your whole narrative about you under the hood is I'm a piece of shit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the world will never know it because I'm successful and I'm doing good and I'm great, we're great. And then you go home at the end of the day and you're like, God, I suck as a human.
If you think about our wheelhouse or the most common client who walks into Milestones right now, it's really fascinating. There was so much wealth built in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Kind of, when was the housing crisis? 2007-ish?
7, 8.
Yeah. And so just all the wealth built. And so the chickens are coming home to roost on the kids who were raised by those parents. Hmm. Because what was the movie Wall Street? Greed is Good. You remember that?
Yeah.
And so,
Michael
Douglas nailed it. So we get so many people, and I say this all the time. I would say 6 or 7 out of 10 people who come into Milestones have that narrative. They go into a group with someone who's had horrific event trauma, oftentimes like childhood sexual abuse. So we're in the group with that person. They run into my office and they're like, I don't think I deserve to be here. I'm like, whoa, hang on, slow down. What's going on? They're like, I just heard Susie tell about her trauma as a child, and my trauma is nothing like that. Hmm. Then I'm like, okay, do you have 10 minutes? Can we talk about developmental wounding? Can we talk about death by 1,000 paper cuts? Can we talk about how your wounding, which seems relatively innocuous to Susie's, changed your self-narrative? And that got you to sit in that chair right there because you weren't thriving, you were surviving, and you knew you needed to come into treatment.
You know what? You bring up a great point, and this is something I'd love to talk about for a minute, because I do think, obviously, we're a little biased and bought in because both of us have personally benefited and both of us have chosen this as a profession.
True.
So needless to say, we care about the journey of change, self-transformation. We call it inside baseball's doing your own work. Mm-hmm. We care about people growing and healing parts of their story. We think that makes for a better humanity. Mm-hmm. And I hope that anybody listening to this show, you don't have to care about this to be interested in this, but at the end of the day, what we hope that this thing does is it makes being human a little more digestible. Because otherwise you could say, man, it can be hard. And it feels, in some ways, I'm going to do exactly what the clients were doing. I was going to say hard is relevant.
Yeah.
Because we're very privileged with where we live, what we do, all that stuff. And I've been to places in the world where hard is hard, different kind of hard.
Absolutely.
But no doubt, wherever you are, whatever you got going on, hard can be hard. And we hope to offer practical wisdom, life lessons, encouragement, just meaningful information about the human experience. How do you live, love, and lead better? And I don't want it to ever feel like it's coming from an expert, like 10,000 feet, right. We're dropping in. Here's what you need to do to change your life. That's the way I learned a lot of stuff early on. I want it to feel like we're sitting in your living room talking to a buddy. I mean, if you think about it, and that's what makes you, I think, so approachable you're a Vanderbilt honors grad. And we could go on and on about your resume. You didn't talk about any of that. You just jumped that part of your story. But a highly accomplished academic that has parlayed into
Can I interrupt real quick?
A profession.
So if you look at that, that's interesting. And had I not suffered that wounding, I don't know if I would be a Vanderbilt honors grad.
Interesting.
This is 6th grade. That was a magical year for me, 13 years old. Went to the state championship in baseball. It was just like a magical year. You know, that year when you're a young teen and everything is just like new and exciting. And I had my favorite school experience, my favorite teacher, Miss Caperton. I'll never forget her. And and she and the other teachers put on all these plays and theatrical events and musical things and stuff like that. And that's where I just really found myself. Stand-up comedian, like a magician that failed. Like I had this magical like thing that I was doing in front of the kids. They're like, "Oh, it's in his lap," and it was in my lap, right? It's like, "Oh my God," a total failure, but it was still just so fun, just being on stage and being a lot and just performing. And so after I had moved back to Memphis to do a residency, my 6th grade teacher called and she said, "I understand you've had a baby. I want to come by and say hi."
Miss Caperton.
Miss Caperton.
Caperton.
Incredible human.
Whoa.
Yeah.
She's kept up with you all those years.
Oh, yeah, she's awesome. So she came by and she met our baby Cole. And we were just having a little chat and there was a little pause. She said, "Neil, I want to tell you something. I've never told you this before." She said, "Your parents came to the parent-teacher meeting when you were in the 6th grade. And your dad's like, 'How's he doing?' She's like, 'He's doing great, making good grades.' And she said, 'I told your dad,' she said, 'I think Neil has a future in theater. He's just, so comfortable on stage, hams it up, loves it. He just clearly like that's his best self.' And she said, 'I told your dad that.' And he looked at me sternly. He said, 'No, he's going to be a doctor.'"
Wow.
And she said, "Well, Mr. Bomar, he could be a doctor if he wanted to, I think, but I just think he has a real proclivity for theater." And she said, "No, he's not doing that. He's going to be a doctor." And so it's like in a movie where like things go around. When she told me that, I was like, "Oh my God."
So he never told you that at home?
Oh God, no.
Whoa.
No. So, it's just the room kind of went around for me like, am I a doctor because I wanted to be? Or am I a doctor because my dad told me to be? It just really threw me. So the reason I interrupted you is I think out of our developmental wounding, if you look at what we're really, really great at and where we overcompensate, oftentimes you can tie it back to areas where you feel really insecure. And so I felt very insecure about not succeeding. And so I feel like I overcompensated in the area of academics because I'm not a good student. Like you and I both, if I may call you out, we're very ADHD.
Oh, of course.
Like legitimate ADHD. Yeah. Like me.
Sometimes I don't have the H on board, but I'm very DD.
That's sure. Fair. That's fair. You're DD. So
actually, you know what? I'm just going to drop one of the D's because I don't always think it's a disorder.
That's fair.
I get that at extreme levels it can be, but I think when I first got tested for it and I started learning about it, and I was like, disorder. That's all I heard was like something's very wrong with it. When actually, they didn't have them, but they've gone back some of the greatest presidents. Abraham Lincoln, they go back and say actually they fit all the criteria.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's actually can be a gift too for all my ADDers out there.
For sure. So, but I wasn't able to, like all my friends were in a fraternity at Vanderbilt. Well, I'd come from this public high school in Shelbyville. I was a decent student there, barely made it into Vanderbilt. And so I had to study my ass off to make good grades. And I knew I wanted to go to med school. So I had all these tutors and all this, I had all this support. So I get to med school and it was just too much. And so interestingly, and we're being authentic here. I can broadcast this, but I really struggled in the first 2 years of med school. And so for me, I just had to stretch those 2 years into 3. It's like them handing you a phone book and saying, you're going to have a test on this tomorrow. And my brain is not a data. I'm a story person. I'll remember your story, but don't give me your phone number because I'm not going to remember it.
Or your name.
Or your name. That's a thing too.
But let me see your face. I'll never forget you.
Yeah. But so, interesting when we work with our clients, many times I'll ask like, where are you most adept? Where do you hyperfunction? And oftentimes you can tie that back to kind of overcoming an area of wounding or an area of insecurity.
That's strong.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Is it Caperton or Caperton?
Caperton.
What made Miss Caperton your favorite teacher?
Oh, God. She just, well, I guess she's a 7 on the Enneagram. Always upbeat, loved to teach, hilarious. Very creative. So there was Miss Caperton and Mr. Yo's, which is an interesting name. And so our rooms, or homeroom, you remember you had a homeroom?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So our homerooms are very competitive. And so we would play each other. And our volleyball teams were always in the finals and stuff like that. But Miss Caperton, I don't know, she saw something in me. And that I have this Polaroid of us. I was bawling the day I left 6th grade. And my friends are looking at me like, dude, what is wrong with you? Like, summer is starting. But it was such a magical experience. And leaving Miss Caperton, Miss C, we called her. I don't know. I that's a really good question, Miles. I think she saw me for who I was.
Come on.
And she accepted me for who I was.
And for a kid that hadn't experienced that yet,
Yeah.
that was quite emotional, I'm sure.
Yeah, I need to say this. My mother was a fabulous yin to my father's yin to his yang. My mother's still alive, and when I say still alive, she has more energy than you and I. Her brain is unbelievable. I pray to God that I inherited her brain. But she is the sweetest, kindest. You talk about hospitality, dude. My mother is Ms. Hospitality. And just loving, unconditional, forgiving, like all the areas my father struggled in, my mother excelled in.
And I think it's a good time to insert that, in that we'll be ideally weaving in and out of authentic stories. That's what this whole idea of being human is, that we are a currency of story. That's that we live a story. And I think we're going to be talking stories a lot. We're going to be dipping into backstories. I think it's always important to know that whenever we evaluate and turn over rocks in our stories, this was difficult for me early on in a change process, because it required me looking at my family of origin, which I was highly protective of, for obvious reasons, because biologically I'm tribal. It's like, they can't be bad, or that means something's wrong with me, and something's wrong with them, something's wrong. And you go down that whole road. So
that's right.
When I began to turn over those rocks and see the flaws in my parents and my upbringing, and identified some of those, I felt so guilty.
Yeah.
And I think for a while there, sometimes we got to be careful with our profession, because I think we can drive a wedge sometimes where maybe there's not a wedge needed. And sometimes we can invite a boundary where sometimes it's a desperate boundary needed.
I'm so glad. Yeah. Keep going. I love this. I want to talk about boundaries.
It's really difficult to find that nuanced rhythm, but I always want to we strive to be, protected, not protective is the right word, respectful is the right word. You used it. When we talk about our elders, the people that raised us, because we started out talking about your dad and how awesome he is.
He is incredibly awesome.
And he was.
Yeah.
And he had some things that we also now know started because he didn't get proper.
That's right.
Certain things. So I just think context is everything on all this.
It is, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I definitely want to be fair to him, because he's not here to say, well, you you were lazy and you were disorganized and all that. I mean, he could definitely take up for himself in this discussion. But I will say, getting back to the goodness of fit, like if I had been wired differently, it probably would have gone extremely well, and it went well, but it probably would have gone better for Dad. He wanted that, and I don't know. I'm not a tough guy. Like, that's not how I'm wired. I don't like to fight.
You're sensitive.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Yeah. In a great way, I think. That's what makes you really good at your profession.
But if he'd had somebody that was just wired differently, they may have gotten along swimmingly.
And you guys were challenged, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Relationally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're very different people. And people say that a lot. They're like, you have your mother's energy, you don't have your father's energy.
I think it's important too for people to hear. One of the things that we get an opportunity, we're really getting under the hood, which is kind of fun. That's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because a lot of the conversations that I'm having are with people that therapy's not even as part of the conversation. We're going to be having high level stuff where we're not getting deep into the psychology. Right. Obviously, I'm passionate about this lane, and I think it does have a whole lot to do with becoming a good human. So we'll be talking about it. But with you, we can really talk about it, which is fun, is Miss Caperton. I think that was such a beautiful insert, because we Caperton, get that right. Thanks for correcting. Gotta get that right. She was an angel.
Oh yeah, no.
And speaking of angels, we have this work that we do at Onsite, where it's the Wellness Retreat Center that both Dr. B and I are a part of, including Milestones. And we help guide and walk with people into their story. Sometimes that's going back, sometimes it's current time, sometimes it's going forward, to evaluate and assess certain parts and certain narratives that maybe we downloaded that might not be optimizing or serving us the best that they could be. And sometimes that clinical terms, we're helping resolve trauma or stress or depression, anxiety, all the things. It is very, I'm not going to say it's vital, but I think it's vital because I've seen people do it without it. It's very essential. It's important to have a stabilizing presence, metaphorically or realistically, to wade in those waters. Because if you're going back and looking at hard things, it's important to have somebody besides yourself to be able to feel like you're seen and valued. Because a lot of times what we're trying to do when we're helping people resolve obstacles in their lives is it came from a certain time in their life where they weren't felt seen or valued. That's right. And usually it's real time, carried over. So we'll introduce this concept we call angel work, whereas we will invite people, and I won't get into the whole experience or exercise, but I think it'd be cool for those at home that might want to just even identify, who was that for me? Yeah. Where we'll say, who was someone in your life that was really instrumental in you becoming who you are today, that you look back on and you think, man, they were really an influence. They were really a rock in my story. And what's surprising for people, it's often not the parents.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it is, or sometimes it's part parents, but it's often a teacher, a coach, some other caregiver, which I believe, if you've studied sociology, that I think we started getting it wrong in the 50s when we started believing that the two-parent, two-child system and fencing in our yards was the way to go. Because prior to that, when we went through the Great Depression in the 30s, you had communities living together.
Right.
So when Dad became an alcoholic, Uncle could step in because he was next door and give some attachment where Dad was falling short. When Mama, and so there was more of a community upbringing. That's what we emulate at Milestones.
That's absolutely
and Onsite is we emulate the way naturally communities can come around people, and nobody has to be perfect. So I think that's a good part of this conversation. You got two people who I think we've earned our right to in our space. We've been doing it a long time, and we've made an impact. So largely, some people might look at us and say, "These guys know what they're talking about." And then yet you take all of what we know away, and it's like we're just a couple humans banging off the guardrails trying to figure it out. And the fact that we, it's one of my favorite quotes is to know what you know and to know what you don't know is the mark of one who knows. And I think we're okay with that. Like this is what I hope people get a picture of what healing is like, is two guys can sit around and have a conversation, and we're not sitting, we didn't start with our highlight reel. We didn't say, here's everything we've done, here's everything we've accomplished, here's everything we're going to do, here's how great we are, rah. It's like, that's true too. And we'll dip in and out of that. But part of our highlight reel is we're proud of what we've overcome. And we're not ashamed of it anymore. It doesn't define us anymore. So doesn't it feel so freeing to be able to talk about it? I can get emotional just thinking about it.
I love it. And I'll never forget this. And I just texted him the other day. I was like, you may not remember this, but it was a facility I worked with 15 years ago. And the CEO of this facility was meeting with all the employees, and he walked in and got really quiet, and he just looked around, and he said, and he uttered the following sentence: "All I have to offer you is my brokenness." And he just sat there and looked around. And I thought, what a brave thing to say, and what the hell does that mean? And it's interesting. I just had this discussion with my wife and her friends. My wife has this friends group, women, and I was supposed to get out of the house, but I didn't make it out of the house, and they're there. And I come in, and I'm thanking them for being a part of my wife's life. And I told them, I said, in most dinner parties, I end up with the women in the kitchen because, I'm the psychiatrist, and they have these questions for me, and the men are in the other room leading with their highlight reel. Like, I shot a 74, or I did this, I killed a 12-point buck, right? And I just get really uncomfortable with that whole thing. And so I think if we're just honest, I don't think we need to live in this, I'm so broken, I'm a victim, I'm so fragile, right? I think resilience is one of the greatest things a human can possess, right? But leading with a highlight reel is the first thing that turns me off in a relationship. Now, the converse, somebody that leads with all of their foibles and their, if they're too much that way, like I'm so broken and I'm not fixable and I'm so vulnerable and fragile and transparent, like that's
Well, they're both the same side of the coin,
bingo.
because you're either meeting a person or you're meeting their accomplishments.
Lovely.
And
True.
you're either meeting a person or you're meeting their failures. You're going to wrap your identity around one or the other.
That's exactly
Kind of your
right.
choice.
That's right.
And often people have to dip in and out of trying this identity on when they're deconstructing their faith or their emotional life or their story.
Fair.
You kind of have to, okay, well, let's talk about the broken part of me. Let's grab some labels and see them, try them on. Okay, maybe I'm depressed, maybe I'm anxious. But where I see it problematic is where we as a field, or wherever what they're reading in the personal growth or self-help world, doesn't help them go from, this is a part of my story. It's not my story.
Right.
This is a part of my identity. It's not my identity. But some people grab those as a safety measure and try to navigate the rest of their life as a recovering person, which means I always have permission to not be the best version of myself. And I think that's bullshit.
It is, and that's over-identifying with your illness.
Yeah, it's where we get locked in victimhood.
Yeah, I think one of the most profound meetings I've had with you and watching you interact with the staff was when you shared the video that the influencer on Instagram when she was talking about. Do you remember that?
I remember which one.
Oh man, she's like, don't weaponize.
Oh yeah,
You remember?
Yeah.
What's her name? She's incredible.
Gosh, you guys remember her name? We just looked her up not too long ago. Look her up real quick, Ashley. Raquel. Yeah. Look up her last name.
Yeah. So
she's a therapist. She
Yeah.
deserves credit, because I've just started watching her too, maybe about a year ago, and I think she's really taking a different angle on. Because we had somebody recently, maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, that came out and they got interviewed on Rogan. They had a book that did pretty well, and they were talking about how bad therapy can be, how negative it can be. And the whole book was debunking therapy as a concept. And I didn't read the book, so that's not fair. Maybe she gave more context, but she wasn't right. I mean, because she talked, or she wasn't wrong fully, because she talked about that if you don't ever break out of it and all you do is over-identify and obsess with your problems, you become your problems.
That's right.
That was kind of her take. And I thought it was a good take. But I don't know that it was fully balanced or fair. And I think what Raquel is doing, and I've been watching her for maybe a little under a year. I'm just getting new to her, so I don't know a lot about her other than what she's putting out. But I really respect her, because she's taken a different angle, saying, no, therapy, coaching, change, deep relationships, vulnerability, authenticity is wildly important to the human experience. And you can't get stuck in it.
Absolutely.
You can't get stuck in the dark parts of your story, or that's all you will present to the world. And if that's all you present to the world, then you will always feel victimized by what happened to you and not what you can become.
That's right. And like,
Did you find her last name? Raquel is how you say her first name? Raquel Hopkins. Is she a doctor? She used to be Dr. Raquel Hopkins, or therapist, Dr. Raquel Hopkins. Anyway, yeah, we watched a couple of her videos recently, and I'll let you take it from there.
No. There was so much in those videos. They're like, she probably said 15 or 20 sentences, and you almost need to start and stop at the end of each sentence to grasp, because there's gold, I feel like, in what she's saying. And I think one of the things, and especially being brought up the way I was brought up, like pull yourself up, quit complaining, that kind of thing, I have to check that. But I do think at Milestones, our therapists do a really, really good job of allowing the client to get into their story and to really kind of join with them and believe the aspects of their developmental wounding, while at the same time engendering resilience and trying to build resilience. Because if we unzip them and send them into the world in a victimhood mentality, that's not doing anybody any good.
Which we have.
Yeah,
it's tough to do. It's tough to be able to accomplish both those goals in a short amount of time. At times, it's why we constantly are evaluating our model. And I think anybody doing anything should always be doing this, but it's difficult, because time and tools and everything evolves, and we're learning. I mean, some of the stuff I was doing 15 years ago, I look back and I'm like, why were we doing that?
Boy, we do evolve, don't we?
Well, now we know so much more.
Yeah.
But I think it's important. That was talking about, I'm going to miss it again, but Caperton. I'm going to miss Caperton. I think it's important, back to the angel work.
Yeah.
And I should write that down so I don't make that mistake again. Poor Miss Caperton. I hope she hears this. Capers.
You eat capers and stuff.
Capers.
And those little things.
Miss Caperton. Capers. I got it now. I want to meet her one day.
She's incredible. Yeah.
Is we will have people identify who was that in your story before we walk them into maybe the deep end of like their stories, like, and so that they can, and then we would have them even though that person's not there, we might say, let's just say that they are. Let's put a chair out here. Let's say that they're here.
Yeah.
And what would they have said to you then? What do you think they have to say to you now? Inevitably, what always comes in, they don't know. I mean, you hadn't had a relationship with them since they were in 6th grade. In your case, it was a little different, but some people hadn't seen them for 20 years and they'd be like, they'd tell me they were proud of me. Tears well up in their eyes.
Dude,
they immediately
I'm getting emotional right now just thinking about doing that very thing. Like, wow.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. She was super special. She really was.
Oh, she's not with us anymore?
Yeah, she's with us. You know, like every human who goes through this life, she's had her own medical challenges, but she'll reach out to me occasionally and just, you know, wish me well, find out how I'm doing. But you know, I really appreciate you bringing that perspective on who she was, and I've never really thought of her in that role, and that I've always loved her and cherished her, but that really elevates her.
And I think it's cool. I'm glad you shared her and brought her into our world, because I think everybody has somebody. Actually, well, you know, it's interesting side stories. I was in a group. I wasn't in the group, but we had a group going on. Yeah. And they did the angel work, to introduce the concept of the angel work. And there's a whole experience. I'm not going to get all the way into it, but it's basically you start to feel really locked into how significant that person was in your life, just like you did. And you shared the emotion of it, which was beautiful. But I had there, if you work in the trauma business, you see ungodly things. I mean, some of the stories you and I both have heard, just when you work with somebody, I don't think I could hear anything worse than what you've survived, and you do. It's just, the world can be a tough place for a lot of people. But I have had it happen a couple of times where somebody like, I got nobody. I can think of no one in the environment I grew up in that felt safe to me or felt like they encouraged me. And I had somebody doing that in one of our groups, and we weren't sure where to go with that, because it was kind of like, and then suddenly, oftentimes if you just don't fill the space, and if you just let it breathe, they'll come to a conclusion. The conclusion was, he said, well, there was a dog. And he remembered a stray dog that became a pet. That was the only presence in his life. I could cry thinking about that. It was the only presence in his life that showed him safety. And so it's like, okay, there's your angel. And so after lunch, I went and got Sammy. Sammy was our campus dog at the time. And they started to do their angel work. He was the only one that hasn't gone, because it took him a while to identify who his angel was. And it was his turn to go. And I went and got Sammy. And right at the time we introduced him to go, we opened the door, and Sammy walked in the door to play the role of his stray that was since gone. And Sammy walked in that room. There's 10 people sitting in a circle. And he didn't know what to do or where to go. And I didn't know how this would go. I was like, what if Sammy goes in there and ignores the guy? This could be really bad. We might be treating him for that. He went in there, tail wagging, and went beeline straight to that guy and walked up, put his paws on his chest. He was sitting on the floor.
That's insane.
Got it.
That is incredible.
It might have changed his life. Now, I say that to say, those are the kind of experiences, that's not in a therapeutic playbook.
Right.
That's not, we didn't learn that in grad school. That's a human experience.
That's a spiritual experience, right?
Spiritual experience. Yeah. But that's why it's so much of what we do behind the curtain of psychology. If you're doing it right and you're letting it breathe and you're trying not to be perfect with how you facilitate, and this is off limits, we can't ever do that. That might not go. Swing. Sometimes you just got to get out of the way and swing and let the environment be the healing glue. And that's one thing I can say I'm really proud of. And you should be proud of too, because I think you are part of the magic sauce that will always be at Milestones. This beautiful residential program that you've helped create is we really try to take a human effort at resolving a very complicated issue for one reason and one reason only. It's that people come in feeling dehumanized by the pain that they carry.
That's right.
And if we can do anything for them, is we want them to feel more human by the time they leave our care. And what's ironic and amazing is they often don't say it was, and don't get me wrong, we're clinically sophisticated too. Absolutely. Medically sophisticated. We've got some great clinicians. Yeah. But they don't name that on the surveys. It was this approach to therapy. It was this group. It was this. It was like, I just felt so cared for.
Yep.
I felt so seen. I felt so Miss Caperton.
Can I share something with you?
Yeah.
So I just met with a client today, and I wrote this down and asked her if I could share this quote, and that just fits right here. So I asked, because she's getting ready to leave, and I said, can we just debrief a little bit, and you tell me what have been the most powerful aspects of the program? And she said, it's been so powerful for me to hear people say to each other over and over, I love you, and mean it.
Mm.
Yeah. And I talk about, when people come in, I talk about many times the first day, because there can be a guardedness, and people carry shame. You do such a good job about talking about shame. You're like the shame expert as far as educating on that.
Thank you.
And so I talk to people like, this should be a safe space for you to have the luxury of falling apart. Because think about out there, at home, at work, in school, whatever, rarely do you have the luxury of falling apart. And at Milestones, in a safe way and in an appropriate way, people have the luxury of falling apart. And she said, I remember you told me that, but she said, it's also the luxury of being in the mess with everyone else when I'm falling apart. So, and then the other thing she says is, she said, we get wounded in community, but we also heal in community. And so, I think the quote that you coined, reconnecting humanity, like God, it's almost everything. Think about our walk on this earth. It's so relational. There's this game, Would You Rather? You just play that game with your kids.
Awesome. Well, I played with my kids, but it got pretty dark when I was playing it back in my single day.
So
I should do it with my kids. That's fun.
It's fun. Yeah. And so I love to ask.
PG version for sure.
Right, exactly. But like, would you rather spend the rest of your life indoors or outdoors? Like, wow, what do you think about that? But think about, and she did say, like, sometimes it can be a little much having so many people around you, but ultimately it's so healing. And so I would ask, if you had to choose, would you rather spend the rest of your life alone or the rest of your life in a tight-knit community? And you got to choose the community.
I would think that most people, that'd be a majority decision. Most people would, in theory. But then if you said, well, how much of your time is going towards building this versus this?
That's right.
Because we live in a world that elevates this because of these screens.
Amen. Yeah, you're right.
In some ways, I'm not being too down on the screen. In some ways, they can build community, but if it's all we do to build community, it's a propped up isolation.
There's no doubt about it. So, reconnect, and I've said this so many times. I'll say it again. On my debriefings with clients who are leaving after having spent their time at Milestones, and I'll ask them, what was the most impactful? And because we offer EMDR, brain spotting, breath work, equine, adventure, individual therapy, group therapy, like all these offerings, 80% of people tell me the community was the most healing. It wasn't Dr. Bomar's prescription for a medicine. It wasn't my, intervention in therapy where I said what I thought was the right thing to change their life. It was just the simple act of being in community.
And I hope everybody hears this, and especially at the time and space that we're in now in humanity, is you would think that our version of curated community is, let's go find a bunch of people that really are aligned in their beliefs, that are really alike in what they do and how they move throughout the world. For sure, they got to be aligned politically to get along that way. That's not the case.
No, it's not.
They couldn't be more different. Yeah. And politically, religiously, and yet if you give it space, that's exactly what I think the way we were all designed to be. I think that's the way the world is designed to be. And I think we're going to get back there.
Yeah.
Everybody's pretty discouraged about the state of the world in some ways because there's a lot of polarity, a lot of disagreement. Mental health statistics are off the chain.
Truly.
And I agree, but weirdly, because I sit behind the curtain of having worked with tragedy for so long, I'm a bit optimistic because I've seen what happens just on the other side of the worst. And I'm not going to say we're in the worst. I'm not one of those that's like, oh my gosh, everything's raining. There's great things going on in the world too. It's just we don't. If the only way you get that information is from mainstream media, you're not going to hear about those. Those are things that don't get reported on because they don't sell news. But you're going to hear all the bad stuff. And I'm prone to it too. I'm a human. So some days I get down and I'm like, golly, we're ever going to get back on track here as planet Earth? But I feel like there's a great connection coming, a reconnection coming. I think we're going to come out of this better than we came into it. I think a lot of it obviously started in, speaking 2007, 2008, that's when we all started getting apps on our phone.
Right.
Around that's when and that was a significant marker. 2020, 21, 22, COVID, post-COVID, significant marker. And I feel like these things that we have survived, if you feel like you're surviving right now, I have been front row to, I don't even know, 50, 60,000 people coming in a survival space, and watch what happens just on the other side of that with the right ingredient, which is usually community done right.
That's right.
And they go to thriving. And so I feel like we're headed towards something good. What I hope is that we can start to invite people out of their corners and away from, look what you've done to me with what you believe. I can't believe what you believe. The fact that you believe what you believe is detrimental, and it's probably going to kill me and everybody I know. I mean, that's when you get in full survival mode. That's what we would see with trauma survivors.
Absolutely.
Those are people who can't separate reality. Those are the extremes, but the extremes are what gets reported on. I think there's a lot more people that are somewhere in the middle of that trying to figure it out.
Absolutely.
Being like, you know what? I still love my friends that don't believe the way I believe. And I really believe a lot of it starts when we anchor ourselves in a way that internal data points start to inform how we show up in the world versus chasing what everyone else thinks about us. And we see that a lot when people come into change processes, is if they had a moment at sixth grade, I'm sorry, not sixth grade, they had a moment of the bike moment, the death moment, then you start reaching for external data points for you to be okay in the world. Mm-hmm. And you'll do that through your whole life. You do it through accomplishment, through success, through on and on and on.
The underpinning of codependency right there. Yeah.
And then at some point you turn the corner and you start to take the Mrs. Caperton and you start to adopt those traits yourself, for yourself. Internally, you don't have to look to her to feel seen. Suddenly you can start to feel seen.
That's right.
And you don't look for psychological safety. Are they safe? Are they safe? I don't need to be with that community. That's a bad relationship. You start to see safety's an inside job.
Absolutely.
It's an internal process, and it will never be sustainable if it's somebody else's. It doesn't mean we don't need other people to validate it and to affirm us sometimes, but if our worth is in the hands of others, we will always be chasing it.
God, that's so true.
And I think we're reaching a point where people are starting to get tired of that. They're getting tired of being stressed, overwhelmed, overcooked, and they're starting to look for answers. Now, desperation doesn't look too pretty on paper, but we've seen desperation way too much to see that once you can calm that temperature a little bit, it turns into opportunity, and ultimately it turns into connection, which is what I'm really jazzed about. I'm excited about. I think we could talk all about the complexities of the problem, but I think we need to spend a little bit more time on the solution. How do we come together?
Yeah. And to your point, like, I think it's good to identify what are our sacred cows. And for many people, it's religion, it can be politics, it can be culture, cultural issues. When my family and I went into the family intensive with Carlos, one thing that I vowed to do, and I'm so glad I did, I said, I'm going to put everything on, like, what are the sacred cows that I've held on to that I'm open to looking at and open to getting a different perspective on. And so the things that I took off the table, I wasn't interested in looking at changing my spouse, because I love my spouse and I love my marriage. It's a great marriage. My faith walk is super important to me. And so that was not going to be put on the table. And then my dearest friends and family. So marriage, faith, friends and family, that was not on the table. Everything else I put on the table going into that. And so when when we ended our session with Carlos and he gave us some feedback, he said your guys' strengths is in your openness, like being open.
Mm.
And that's one of the core, like the Anchor Award, right? Openness is a big part of our
core company values.
Core values.
We celebrate somebody every quarter
Yeah.
for that being one of their traits.
Yeah. And so I'm working on a lecture for the clients because we give lectures. And that lecture is entitled, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be relational?" Because you and I could talk about religion, abortion, politics, gender, sexuality. We can talk about all those hot button topics, and you would have very strong feelings in your personal ethic, and I would have very strong feelings. And if we allowed that to come between us, that would crush our relationship. You know, it would just prevent relational intimacy, right?
And think about that. I'm so glad you said that, because think about if that's the way we viewed relationship, is that we're going to start there. Do you believe what I believe? Because that's the way we size people up.
It's exactly.
And we couldn't help anybody.
That's exactly.
And nobody would be able to benefit from the guy sitting across from me that I think Miss Capers had it right in that you became a doctor in multiple times over, but you're also an artist. And in a way, you infuse theater and creativity into a practice that is quite sterile.
Yeah.
And that is your gift of making medicine relational. I don't know many people that can do that.
Thank you. That's definitely food for thought.
This is fun.
I love you, dude.
Back at you.
I do. You know, that's another thing. Why don't just like that woman said, I love hearing people say I love you and mean it. Why don't we say that more? Why just to our friends, why don't we say I love you?
God, we could do a second one on that one. I think a lot of it depends on some people heard it and didn't feel it.
Yeah.
Some people felt it and didn't hear it. And so I think everybody's got something to navigate. I got my own story as it relates to that. And it's been a challenge at times with how I show up with what my wife's love language is and what mine is, because of what I saw, what I heard, what I was imprinted on. And therefore, that's either comes naturally or it doesn't come naturally.
That's
and
right.
The beauty of all of this, and I hope this is what everybody takes away from this conversation, because it's interesting, you know, we did some pre-production work because we would take advantage of somebody like I know you're creative, but you also got a really sharp mind and know a lot about the brain and neuroscience and medicine. And I'm sure that would have been interesting too. We could have dove into that. Maybe we'll do it another time.
Yeah.
But I just love where this went, that we showed the human side of a psychiatrist. That's highly relational. And I hope what people take away is that if we can anchor ourselves in a way that someone else saw us, that we can start to believe our own potential, then the fun part comes. Because you and I are getting to swim in the fun pool now, which is you don't just look back to see who did that for me. You start to look forward and say, who can I do that for?
Whoa. Yeah.
But that angel piece, once you get reconciled, start doing some work, is my fuel. I get to be that. Somebody might one day identify me as one of those guys that saw them at the time they needed to be seen, that I could be impacted. And I used to, early in my career, I needed that. Like I needed the feedback. I needed somebody to write me a letter and say, you're doing great. Or,
affirmation.
Man, you changed my life. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm a words of affirmation guy.
Me too. Yeah.
So I still enjoy hearing, like when our company Onsite or Milestones changes our life, people are like, I'm sure you get tired of hearing this. I say, you kidding me? This is why I show up and do it every day.
Gold.
So, but the difference is now I appreciate it, but I don't need it. I don't have to have it.
Yeah.
I don't have to read every letter or every comment, the good or the bad, because we get some bad ones too. There's no way to work with people going through stressful circumstances where sometimes that stress is not going to come sideways.
It can be messy.
And sometimes we're going to drop the ball. It's going to happen.
Yeah,
it's human nature.
Yeah.
But I don't live or die by that input anymore, because I've done enough of Miss Caperton work to realize that an angel exists within me. I'm a good human.
Yeah.
I really believe I'm a good human. And I think all humans are good at some level. I've been with the worst of the worst, and I could find some good in them. And I hope that's what Human School does for everybody. I mean, we happen to work in a space where we try to extract good from people who feel like they've been swimming in the darker parts of their story. But really, this is not for people chasing mental wellness or mental health. It's for everybody. And one other point I want to make is, earlier when you're talking about where you land on the barbecues, where you're in the kitchen.
That's embarrassing to say.
No, I think it's cool because you know yourself.
Yeah.
And, but it doesn't exclude the guys in the living room talking about hunting or fishing or sports in the highlight reel. I like that too. I do that too. I sit and talk about.
Because you have a big highlight reel.
I do. I like talking to those. I like that world. I just don't like that world alone.
Absolutely.
I can't have just that or just that. I can be both. Because I also think, we could get into one of the things we were going to talk about, because I like what you say about masculinity and shame and some of those things. And I know we had this big charge about masculinity is toxic. I think we just swung too far. I really do. I think we overcorrected. What can it be? You bet. But is it important to bring that energy into leadership in life sometimes? You bet.
Absolutely.
And I think we can be both. I think we can have traits on both sides. We can be sensitive and we can be tough.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the human experience. It's never one way. I think one of my mentors, who I've gotten to sit with quite a few times, a guy named Richard Rohr, he's written some great books, is he really taught me the art of dualistic thinking, is don't get locked into a lane when it comes to anything. Be curious, be open-minded, because ultimately humans are complex. And the more we can accept that complexity, the more we can show up and use it for good in the world.
Amen.
Yeah. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, man. This is fun.
Anything else you want to share before we finish laying the plane?
Birds. I'm into birds. What are you into lately? Are you into
Birds.
anything?
I like birds. I feed birds. I had
But are you into birds?
well, let me tell you, I got into it for a minute, and this is a bad excuse, but I am a multi-hobbyist, meaning I have way too many hobbies to be great at any of them.
I hear you.
But I like a lot of stuff. Speaking of the ADD. So I'm very much into, I got into contrast therapy, where I was doing hot, cold treatments.
Right.
So going from a cold plunge to a sauna, really got into it last year. And I got a sauna and a plunge, and I set it up beside each other, and the sauna has glass on the front, and it's right in my landscaping. So I put like 5 bird feeders with seeds, and then I put 4 hummingbird feeders above that. So I can sit there for 25 minutes and have a bird sanctuary.
Oh, you're killing me.
Well, then I wanted to be able to identify the birds. And so I ordered on Amazon this bird identification thing that I put in a frame in the sauna. But it wasn't glass, it was plexiglass.
Oh, no.
The sauna melted the bird.
Oh, my God.
The bird sanctuary thing. So I lost my identification thing. But I was on a trail there for a minute where I could see a bird identified, just about all of them.
Okay. I thought I was into birds.
But then now that's gone. I got through that way. I got to get a new method. But I'm into birds. I love all things outdoors. I'm really getting into sports again. I grew up an athlete, and then I kind of went towards creativity. And now my son's loving sports, and so I'm getting back into it. Been playing basketball regularly, with some guys, which I love. You know how much I love to fish and hunt and do all those things, and so I can't get enough of that stuff. That's one thing I'll tell you I'm excited about. And our genius, I was going to say her title, but I don't know, a CMO who heads up all of our marketing, and is also helping produce this podcast and us tell a lot of other great stories. But Sarah has really flipped my perspective on AI and technology, because I was one of those old guys that was like, oh, are we going to be okay? But I'm kind of excited about some of it now. But I will say one of the things I'm most excited about, speaking about hobbies, is you hear all this stuff about 4-day work week, because they're going to do a lot more what we can't do, more efficiency, more time. And some people are worried that, what am I going to do with that time? I'm like, are you kidding?
Yeah, seriously.
Give me the birds.
Absolutely.
Give me the
right. Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I'm excited that maybe all these tools are going to give us more time back to be human and do more natural things that fill us up.
That would be beautiful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll finally get to fish.
Yeah.
I don't even know that we've done it. We've been talking about doing it for years.
I know. I wish you would come to Florida and go out in the flats with me.
That's what you love.
On a paddleboard.
You fly fish or just regular?
I do a little bit of fly fishing, but that's for the purists. I want to kind of catch something, and you have to be kind of close. I can't double haul. I got to learn to double haul. But I don't know. There's just something about being in 1 to 2 feet of salt water, watching animals be animals, watching the redfish trying to get away from the shark and the mullet trying to get away from the redfish. And, it's just,
come on.
man, that's when an animal is just being who they are. That's authenticity. It's survival. And so I'm obsessed with the marine environment on the coast, especially the Gulf Coast.
So check that out.
Yeah, I went to the East Coast. We went to a nature preserve. It's called Little St. Simon's Island. Just a few weeks ago, and it's very bird heavy, and it's just all this huge bird sanctuary. I saw this massive rattlesnake. We saw some really cool animals, but the East Coast, the Atlantic, was just not as beautiful as the Gulf Coast, in my opinion.
Nice.
And,
all right, I gotta come see it.
Oh, it's incredible.
At some point.
Yeah, I can just see you and me out there, just not saying a word, but just throwing a whatever. Yeah, trying to catch it.
Well, leave us with this.
All right.
We want, ideally, this show is going to be about what you don't get to learn traditionally in school. You hope you pick up pieces about how to become a better human, and most of us do in different ways through religion and education and home and all that. But often, clearly, there's gaps, which is why you need people like us to help fill some of those in. But what would be if you could give a message, a short message, let's say a couple sentences, to the entire human experience, to encourage them in some way, what would it be?
Boy, I love that. Obviously, so many ways I could go with this. I just feel that self-awareness is so important. I don't know if you've ever done this, but when you walk into a bathroom and generally there's a mirror right there and you get to see yourself. Have you ever walked into a men's restroom where there are like mirrors here and you get to see the side of your profile? It's kind of unnerving sometimes because you're not used to seeing your profile. It's like, God, I'm getting a double chin. It's just like it's seeing a part of yourself that you're not aware of, and so using that metaphorically, like, I've seen videos of myself interacting with people. Like you're at a party and somebody's taking a video and they send you a clip, and it's like, golly, I didn't know I talk like that, or I didn't know I was so loud, or I didn't know I was so demonstrative, or look at my hands. I just think self-awareness is super, super important. And just how, especially relationally, how do we show up?
Come on. All right. There you go. That's your lesson. You heard it straight from Dr. Neil Bomar. Get to know yourself. Human School 101. We're going to put that in the playbook.
All right. Let's do it.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks for bringing your heart to the table as you always do. And thanks for showing up for people in the way that you show up for. I think a lot of people chase legacy as if they're going to leave something behind. And some people realize legacy is actually what we're doing right now. And you're doing it well. So I'm thankful we get to do it with you.
Thanks for this.
Yeah.
Honored, buddy.
Awesome.
Honored to work with you.
Yeah, same. Thanks for being here. If this conversation meant something to you, do me a favor and send it to one person who you think deserves to hear it. Just one person. That's how we build a community of people who are done performing and ready to actually live. I'm Miles Adcox, and I'll see you next time at Human School.